Hello, Value Vintage community, and welcome back to the channel. I am your host today, Doot, and today I am just doing a tournament report about our events at Star City Games Baltimore, specifically our Sunday 1K. If this is the kind of content you like to see, click all the buttons to make the algorithm like us, the like button, subscribe button, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, let's just jump into what I was playing, how the event was going, and everything about it. So we had 44 players at Baltimore, which is solid numbers. We had 48 on Saturday for our side event, and then I think like 30 for our Friday side event. So decent numbers all weekend. But this is the deck that I registered for Sunday. I placed 14th. I had a pretty bad round one and round two, and then fought my way back. But by the time that I fought my way back to a 4-2, my breakers were pretty much already decided. So I was pretty much missing top eight guaranteed by the end of round five. So disappointed in my performance. I know I could have done better. I can point to specifically a punt in round two, um, where I could have definitely won the game easily, but I just didn't think about a line. The basis of this deck is exactly the permanent you see in play right now. You want to resolve Fluctuator and then churn through your deck and then assemble some combination of a kill with Dread Stinger, facilitated by a Jolted Awake or Unearth, or just dump a bunch of hollow ones into play. You can also make a Scrounging Skyray, Marauding Mako, or Flourishing Fox really big, and then tuck a Footfall Crater on a land and just hit your opponent really, really hard with the Scaling Threat. The deck performed really well. The deck kind of falls apart if you don't open Fluctuator. It has an okay aggro play with your scaling beatdown creatures, and especially Hollow One. You have lines where you're going like cycle a one drop, like cycle for one, cycle for two, and then Hollow One on turn three. Also facilitated by Street Wraith and your two land cyclers. But yeah, I went 4-2 on the day. Definitely could have done better, but really I misread the meta. I think this deck definitely struggled into the meta that we had at Baltimore. Baltimore's meta was very aggressive, and it was not one that I was prepared for. This deck does not really like racy kind of metas, because they force you to have the Fluctuator in the opener, or else you just kind of die. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna be working on this deck some more, and I love playing it. It's really fun, really skill testing. Probably gonna be writing a primer on it soon. But yeah, that's just my honorable mention about how I did at this event. And let's get into the top eight proper. So our eighth place deck is Blue Black Control, played by Azim L. I got a chance to talk to this player after the event, and they said they really liked their list, and there's definitely some changes they would make. Blue-black control is not something you really see a whole lot of in the format, just because Swords to Plowshares and better sweepers in white make going into white really attractive. But this player seems to have identified some combination of things that really make it work. I really like the Brazen Borrower in this deck. Obviously, the deck is really over. This is my usual disclaimer that at the time of submission for these events, these decks were legal, so if they appear over, that is why. So don't worry about legality at time of recording, at time of the event. They were legal. So yeah, this deck is spending its money in a really interesting way. This counterspell art obviously probably is much cheaper, and this definitely would bring it down under the limit. I really like the triple waterlog teachings. Just having access to basically almost all of these like really cool flash creatures, and I'm anyone who knows me or has talked to me for an amount of time knows that I'm such a huge fan of Torrential Gear Hulk. Um, Really curious as to why they're not playing Gifts Ungiven. I find Gifts Ungiven with Torrential Gear Hulk is just ridiculous, especially if you're on multiple teachings. Um, but the game plan of this deck just looks like it's going to be play some control magic, stay alive until you can resolve a Kaido or a Narset or some other engine piece. Kaido especially is really good with Baleful Strix, because you can hit them with Baleful Strix to take initiative or just press damage, and then you pick up the Baleful Strix and get two Kaido activations, probably just like on the modes of like make a drone, draw a card, and then replay the Strix. And yeah, this card is just a really neat card to see getting play. With the upcoming standard bans, I keep wondering if we might get the other Duskmourn Kaido. I'm pessimistic about it, but I think that'd be a really cool deck in the format if that ends up happening. Really, also really curious about the spread of playing Inquisition and then also counter magic. Dimir control usually has this issue of because you have access to both hand attack and counter magic, it's difficult to like pick a lane in some respects because you kind of have to pick whether you're interactive. The traditional wisdom at least is that you kind of have to pick whether your interaction is at sorcery speed or instant speed, but I really like this like blended approach. Inquisition definitely can give you game against some of the fastest combo decks in the format that are looking to go off on turn one or turn two. And then the counter spells just give you like further interaction from there. Nuclear Fallout's a card that I'm super excited to see in this deck. I think this card is criminally underplayed and probably should become our de facto black board wipe. It's been languished for a little bit, but Fallout scales better. You can pop it for X's 1 to sweep up a bunch of small creatures, or you can just scale it into the late game to clear a forged up initiative creature, which is usually the threshold that black board wipes like Languish had trouble hitting. Um, and the red counters, honestly, are like also totally just upside in your deck full of delve spells. And Torrential Gearhulk, obviously, it can cost some life, but I think that is definitely worth the power level of this card. The sideboard is also wild. The sideboard Vren the Relentless is hilarious. Um, I assume this is in there as like a Kalita style card to just wall aggro out forever. I really like Thought Distortion and Blue Black Control too. Thought Distortion is like an extremely powerful breaker for the Control Mirror and against combo, especially against combo. If you can live long enough to resolve a Thought Distortion against combo, they just die. They have no recourse. They just die. Um, Also, really like seeing the Cling to Dust. The sideboard is just like really interesting as it pays a lot of respect and builds around the fact that you're a deck playing three Waterlog Teachings. Interested to see no mystical teachings too. I think blue black control decks probably can splash into teachings as well, and also mystical makes your gifts ungiven piles really good. But at this point, I'm just talking about the blue black Gearhulk control deck that I want to see someone play. Um, but yeah, I really like this deck, and I love seeing the torrential Gearhulk. I love this card. I love casting this card. Um, yeah, so congratulations on it to this pile on top eight. Our next deck in seventh place is mono red, so it's like red blue hollow one. This is an archetype that has seen a little bit of exploration, but not a lot of like true event success. We've seen mono red hollow one do really well, but this is the first real breakthrough for breakthrough pun intended for this blue red variant. So as you can see, it's mostly a aggro deck that wants to discard a bunch of cards to pump up its Flame Booted deck, which is Marauding Makos, and most importantly nowadays Hobgoblin. This card is just unbelievable. What this card is just Slickshot Show Off whenever you discard a card, and it's really wild that this card has that line of text. Um, it leads to some pretty crazy, almost combo style, just one shots out of nowhere. The reason you're playing blue in these decks is you get a little bit more density with Scrounging Skyrays, and then Breakthrough. Breakthrough in this deck is absurd. It's just like two. You are almost always casting it for two, for X's one, so you can retain like a hollow one or some other threat or some other draw spell, and then you give your entire team like +6, and you just explode. They just explode. They just explode. We've got Oxiva Gonas and Detectives Phoenix to uh, abuse the fact that we are discarding a ton of cards to our graveyard, and so Ox lets you really grind really well along with a bunch of your draw spells, and then D Phoenix lets you push really aggressive, hasty, and flying damage when your opponent isn't expecting it. Blue cards also show up in the sideboard specifically for Spell Pierce against the super fast combo decks, and then the two Echoing Truth side are really interesting too. Definitely paying some respect to decks like Ripfield, which can lock you out of the game, or as we'll see in this metagame, it's really good against a resolved Crashing Footfalls, which I bet came up for this pilot. I love seeing the Omnis Ravager. This card's also just a house in general. This is your mid-range game plan for the grindy matchups when you need to just draw extra cards every turn, and this card definitely does that. I've been playing this card a lot not in this kind of shell, but in another sort of aggressive mid-range deck that can clear the way for it, And this card just completely dominates the game if your opponent doesn't have an answer for it. You just never run out of gas, and you always keep dumping more threats. It's really, really strong. This card is extremely strong and probably should get looked at more. But yeah, Cyber looks pretty normal. I like the Lightning Axis, more respect to some of the individual power of big guys like Green White Initiative and occasionally creature combo too. We didn't see any creature combo at this event, but creature combo is definitely a thing that I think should be played more. Nadu and Cephalo Breakfast and Amalia are all very good decks. Um, so yeah, congratulations to our pilot Kasel on making top 8. Our next deck is Beanfinity. So this is a mono blue affinity deck that splashes green for up the beanstalk, and it looks like also some sideboard nature's claims. Uh, this deck is pretty simple. It's just like normal affinity. You play tiny artifacts, and your tiny artifacts discount your bigger artifacts, and your bigger artifacts punch your opponent in the teeth for a bunch of damage, backed up with a cranial playing. Um, this is a really cool affinity variant. We haven't seen this particular variant show up too much. Um, but affinity is just like a really strong deck in the format, and just there hasn't been a ton of innovation and brewing around it just because the deck just, I don't know, people just want to mess with new things and unfounded and unestablished things some more, which is a totally reasonable line of thinking to have. And yeah, this deck just looks super clean. You should have a bunch of evasive guys, a bunch of big guys. The real spice here is in the sideboard. The sideboard Laboratory Maniac is hilarious. This is apparently your pivot for when you get locked out by something like Rest in Peace plus Energy Field. So you can just draw your entire deck with Kozilek's Unsealing and Up the Beanstalk, because Kozilek's Unsealing just adds an Ancestral Recall to 11 cards in your deck, and Up the Beanstalk draws off of almost probably a third of your deck at this point. So yeah, really, really cool deck. Um, I really like it. It's really neat to see Affinity starting to put up results. And congratulations to Fabian D on making top 8. Now this is probably my favorite deck that I saw at the event. I played against this player at one of the side events. And he was wonderful. I don't remember your name. I'm sorry, but there was a long weekend. This is a variant of Rakdos Luris that's just like so cool. It's almost like mono black, like aggro pox that you're splashing a little bit of red in for Lightning Bolt Colligan's command. And the Cyborg Grim Lavamancers. I would love to know how Grim Lavamancer did over the weekend, because I love this card and I kind of think it's pretty good in the deck that can facilitate it. But yeah, you are a very low to the ground, aggressive deck full of little idiots that either are annoying to remove, come back by themselves, draw cards, or just don't die. Like Timeline Color, Bloodghast, and Bloodsoaked Champion just do not die unless you have exactly Swords to Plowshares. And you're playing all these little idiots because you want to facilitate casting Smallpox, flashing back Cabal Therapy. This deck felt really strong when I sat against it at the side of him. It was just like constantly pressuring you, and you had some insane nut draws with Dark Ritual, especially into like a Smallpox or a discard spell. The deck playing 4 copies of Dark Ritual is really crazy in this current environment. Dark Ritual, despite this slightly inflated price, is still hovering around like $2.60 per copy. So spending almost like $13 of your budget on a playset of Dark Rituals is it's definitely much harder than it's ever been. In the past, it's Ritual's been around like $1.50 for the playset, but just because it hasn't seen a major reprint run in a while, it's slowly crept up, which honestly is unfortunate because people don't respect Black Aggro enough. And this deck making top 8 at this event clearly shows that they still aren't. This deck will just overrun you with tiny little guys, or it will grind you into dust by just stripping your hand away with Inquisition and Him and Cabal Therapy. Um, the land destruction package with Smallpox is like super interesting. I love to see Smallpox get cast. I think this card is not only really cool to see play, but also just hilarious. I got hit by this in a pickup game, and I got lambasted by it. Um, Yeah, Ayara's Oathsworn especially is a true value vintage classic that hasn't seen a ton of play recently. Just because it's fallen and kind of out of favor, and because mostly because Dark Ritual's been expensive, but also because the shell that it was played in, Mono Black Knights, which is a really cool deck, also just got really priced out. Honestly, I think that deck can make a comeback, but that's a discussion for another time. Yeah, this deck is awesome. This deck just shreds. I know this player played against Everett on Great One Initiative, one of our moderators, and apparently had some really really interesting games. And I believe it. I would have loved to watch this deck in action some more. I was fighting for my life throughout the entire Swiss, so I didn't get to bird too much. But this deck is just so sick. It's just so cool. Um, so yeah, congratulations to the pilot on making top eight. I'm sorry I don't remember your name, because your deck is easily like my favorite deck in this entire top eight. It's just so unique and so cool. All right, in fourth place, we're getting to our semifinalists here. We have Connor C's take on Blue White Standstill. So this is a standstill based control deck that wants to play its marquee permanent standstill, and then play a bunch of ways to break parity under standstill. This deck looks like it's on a pretty normal package of Timeless Dragon and Shark Typhoon, along with more manlands than I'm used to seeing. I don't see any Mishra's Factories, which are usually something that I'm used to seeing in this deck, but Castle Ardenvale, I suppose, fulfills that function. Hall of Storm Giants and Ancestral Colonnade look pretty good here. And then yeah, past the standstill, you're like a classic blue white control deck. You got a bunch of sweepers, single target interaction, counter magic. Memory lapse is really really interesting. I assume just standstill being really expensive. I mean, this pilot couldn't afford playing counterspell. The main deck negate is also wild. We don't see actual factual negate a lot, even in sideboards in this format. So really curious to see what the reasoning was on this card. Main deck Narset's really cool. This card, Narset has a really interesting position in our format. It's not quite a staple, and you only really play it in certain control decks, and it's not good in every matchup. But in control, specifically in the control mirror and against combo decks, this card can just completely stonewall them. If they don't have a way to pressure it, or they're attacking something like High Tide or Channel Mirror that really, really suffers from the static ability, this card can be an absolute slammer. Um, so, really interested to hear how this card performed. I also love seeing March of Otherworldly Light in the main deck. I think this card needs to see more play if you can fit it. It is 53 cents, and it can be a little bit expensive. Um, but just having a way to remove almost any like problem permanent out of the main deck for relatively cheap, is just really really cool. I also love seeing temporary lockdown. This card's 38 cents now. This is a PSA for anybody playing a non luris white deck, especially like a mid range or control deck. This card is cheap now, and this card just completely decimates a lot of really popular decks. Like any sort of aggro deck, I'm thinking like Convoke. This card does a ton of work against Boros Energy. Um, yeah, this card just like tears entire decks apart. And at bare minimum should be a consideration for sideboards. And yet this card is just so strong. Pick it up for I want you to pick up a playset or two. This card's really good. Peering into the sideboard here, there's some choices. Splendor Mare is hilarious. I understand the thinking of you just tag a lifelink counter onto either a big shark or a timeless dragon. But this is not a card I'm used to seeing. This card is really cool and really funny. I'd be interested to see how much it came up, especially in this like super aggressive meta. I love seeing Decree of Justice. Um, I think this is actually pre-modern tech. You can just cycle it under a standstill and make a horde of guys later game. It's kind of like a Timeless Dragon, but it goes wider instead of taller. It's a little anti-synergistic with your temporary lockdown, but that's fine. This card's basically just uncounterable, make an army in a can anyway. This card, it's just cool to see this card. And then sideboard Prairie Dog. Prairie Dog is usually a card I'm used to seeing in the main deck of Standstill. This card in Standstill, it may look like nothing, but then they just put it into play on turn 2, and then if you don't have an answer for it almost immediately, it will just continue scaling and scaling and scaling into a bigger and bigger lifelink body, and it just completely takes over the game. And if they ever start activating it, you're probably just they're either at mana totals so egregious that you're already losing the game, or they're like just gonna kill you. They're just gonna kill you. Um, do not underestimate this card. This card is an absolute menace. I have lost to this card a pretty embarrassing amount of times. Yeah, so seeing a card this strong in the sideboard is really interesting. Also, no luris. Luris is a standstill classic. You can use it to rebuy your standstill, most importantly, or other copies of Prairie Dog. But yeah, I guess if you're playing less of the so the thing that I always say about Standstill is that Standstill is a control deck until it becomes a tempo deck, and sometimes it just is a tempo deck. And I think this version leans much harder on being a control deck and then relying on Timeless Dragon. Um, when I've usually been used to seeing it having that sort of tempo pivot with these like Prairie Dogs and Lurises and stuff. So really interesting take. Stone of Eric in the sideboard is Stone of Erech. I don't know how to say that card. It's Lord of the Rings card. Is interesting. I don't know what they were trying to hate. I guess it's just like another Soul Guide Lantern. Yeah, this sideboard in general is just really interesting. Definitely some respect paid to Affinity here. A lot of respect paid to Affinity with this sideboard and Null. So yeah, really cool. And now, my friends, we come to the part of the video where we talk about the top 3. All 3 of the top 3 decks are playing Rhinos. Which is wild. We haven't seen Rhinos really put up a lot of tournament results recently. The deck was very much a known quantity. But it hadn't really broken through in a while, and yeah, this event's a reminder of what happens if you don't respect that 2/4/4s on turn 1 or turn 2 is really really good. We'll go through the sort of the more minutiae of the lists individually in a second, but the general idea is pretty simple. It's kind of like the modern decks of old. You want to cast a Shardless Agent or a Violent Outburst, preferably on turn 1 or turn 2 with your Spirit Guides. Dump 8 Trampling Power into play, and then just kill your opponent ridiculously quickly. Your pivot into, if you don't have this kind of turn 3, or this 3 mana play, is you fire like a Laelia or an Initiative Creature or a Minskin Boo. This deck can do some pretty stupid stuff really fast. We also see, I think all 3 of these Rhinos pilots are playing Mystical Disputes in the main board. This particular build isn't on Incubation Incongruity. That deck's not on it either. Okay, here's Incubation Incongruity. This is a pretty usual Rhino suspect of being a little bit of removal that also comes with the card draw, so you can dig a little deeper. This is the first place list. So this is the third place list. It's on Mystical Disputes main. The full plays at a Fire Ice. Notably, if you're trying to play this deck with the Giganta, you cannot play Fire Ice with Giganta because it has the 1 symbol twice. I know that trips people up a bunch. The sideboard is pretty normal. 2 Dead and Gone is really funny, as just respect paid to... I know Dead and Gone was some tech for Dark Depths, and I guess Dead is also some nice tech for the smaller aggro decks. Sweltering Suns is also kind of interesting. I guess because a bunch of your creatures don't die to it, so if you need to play a little slower, you can. This deck is also on the Cascade into Damping Sphere plan. So a lot of Rhinos decks against combo, which is usually Rhino's worst matchup, is just combo decks that go faster than it, will play some Damping Spheres or High Noons sideboard and then board out some of their footfalls, so that when they cast their Cascade spell, they just flip into your 2-mana hate piece. And I've heard that plan. I've heard from a very competent Rhinos player, the person who pretty much made the deck or like really popularized the deck, Andrew, that it wasn't really a great strategy. But I mean, I guess they didn't get punished for it. I think there was 3 combo decks in the field. There was me playing the Fluctuator deck, and then I think there was two High Tide pilots, and that might have been it. And then maybe some other Living End pilot somewhere in there that I don't know. Um, but yeah, also again, respect paid to Affinity. Respect is being paid to Affinity with these Energy Fluxes. Energy Flux is a card that Affinity really, really hates. Double Tabernacle on all of your artifacts is an effect that's just extremely good at hating out very specific things. It also does a lot of work against Thopter Storm, which this deck can struggle against. Um, but yeah, this looks like a pretty normal Rhinos list. The Mystical Disputes I'm also used to seeing in the sideboard, so seeing them in the main deck is an interesting development. It makes sense though because you don't want to have your Rhinos get countered. It's nice to have against the other blue decks, and occasionally you just this deck does tend to very much dump its hand very quickly and then play a little bit more like less fewer. You play fewer spells after a certain point after you dump your hand into your that you dump all your resources into your one drop. So let's take a look at the second place build. This build is on some really interesting tech. It's on a repudiate replicate. Um, I don't know what they're trying to hate on here. I would assume just like the other Cascade decks, but replicate just being a copy of one of your initiative creatures is really cool. This build also won one less Minskin Boo and I think less initiative creatures, which is very interesting. Minskin Boo is just a sensationally messed up card in this deck. You can turn to it pretty easily with the Spirit Guides, and yeah, pretty similar layout here. Reverent Silence is interesting. This is again respect paid to the enchantment lockout decks like Gripfield. Um, and then Ricochet Trap is really funny as more anti-counterspell tech like Mystical Disputes. Ravenous Trap is pretty commonly played as graveyard hate in this deck against something like Dredge, which Dredge was around. We had a Dredge pilot do okay. I think they did okay. But yeah, this is the second place build, and then here's the first place build. So the first place build is on the full play set of initiative creatures, and then only one Minskin Boo, which is very interesting. I know if I were building this deck, I would definitely be on at least three Minskin Boo. This card just kills your opponent so dead. Um, and also we're back on the Incubation Hero, like I mentioned before. This is a Rhinos classic. I think this card's fine. I don't know. I haven't played a ton of this deck. I've only sat across from it a bunch. But this card's always looked pretty decent when I've seen them cast it. Pretty simple normal sideboard, or a more normal sideboard. Only two Mystical Disputes in the sideboard. This build looks like it's just going all in on just kill them dead, which I can certainly endorse. And I mean, this is the winning build. So clearly it's doing something right, either in matchups or in the construction. Nimble Obstruction is some really hot tech. So this is the anti-combo tech that Rhinos has sort of adopted recently. It's really good at stifling specifically a Storm trigger from High Tide or a Lutri trigger or a Cascade trigger out of a faster Cascade combo deck if you can get to 3 mana. Um, and yeah, this card's just this card's some neat anti-combo tech where you just need to race them. And a lot of combo decks in this format, if you stifle a triggered ability, they can kind of get wrecked. And this card, people just don't play around stifles in our format. And so if you can get people with this card, you certainly score some style points. But yeah, congratulations to Andrew M on this build of Rhinos for taking down the whole thing. It's good, it's good to see Rhinos getting there. Um, we've known in the format for a while how good Rhinos is. It just really needed another. It was only a matter of time before it broke through and took a top placement. So with that, that is the Baltimore 2025 1K breakdown. Be sure to click all the things and do the engagement so that we can help grow the channel. And if you're not in the channel and you just found this video randomly scrolling, join the Discord. This is where you can play and learn about all these fun decks and a bunch of other really cool decks in the Value Vintage format. And we'd love to have you. And so with that, I have been Doot, and this has been the channel. So see y'all in the next one.